Thank you. It's a great honor to be asked to do this, and I apologize, it is only in English. Those who know me will know that after, actually it's 4 decades since I started going to the Czech Republic and 2 decades to Slovakia, that the only thing I can order in Slovak is a beer and ice cream, but that's the main thing. I'm not sure who some people I recognize and some people I don't, and for me it's very daunting. First of all, because when a rabbi speaks, he likes to stand up and to look down on everybody. This time I'm sitting in my study, and I hope that you can see me, and I hope that I can speak to you rather than lecture to you. So thank you. I have to be honest and say, I suspect, looking at some of the names, that some of the facts I give are well known to you. But on a night like this, when we're all in our own homes, perhaps it doesn't do any harm to go through some of the basic facts. If I get any of the facts wrong, then later there will be time to put me right or to ask questions. But as almost everybody on the screen will know, that next week Jews around the world begin the festival of Pesach, or Passover. It starts on Wednesday night with a Seder. It's a festive meal surrounded by prayers, storytelling, songs, symbolic foods. And all of it to fulfill the commandment in the book of Exodus chapter 12, where it says, "You shall tell your child on that day." So it starts with the children. Tell your child, but he's also there to remind the adults present of the biblical story of the exodus of the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, liberation from the oppression and the persecution put upon them by Pharaoh, the Egyptian ruler. Well, usually families gather and invite friends to join them round the dining room table for a ceremony that can, if you are so keen or argumentative, last for hours. I said argumentative because one requirement of the Seder is that one should discuss its meaning and the story throughout for as long as you want. And there's a story about 5 rabbis of the 2nd century of the Common Era who carried on all night until their students came to remind them that it was time for the morning prayers. But usually, in most families, it's not an intellectual occasion. It's more like a family gathering. And since everyone is supposed to drink 4 cups of wine, it's hardly a sober occasion. And the Haggadah, that's the book that tells the story, ends with at least 3 rousing songs of a nursery rhyme character. Early in the proceedings, the youngest child present sings a piece of Hebrew that asks, "Why is this night different from all other nights?" Well, this year the Passover Seder will be very different, as Jews all around the world will be celebrating alone or with just 1 or 2 other family members, because of the lockdown caused by COVID-19. However, the ingenious use of Zoom or Facebook can allow families to gather digitally, united on the screens, even if isolated by the play. We can tell the story online, but I wonder, as I thought about it, if all the participants can obtain the simple symbolic foods that we need, the parsley that we dip in salt water before eating it, to remind us of the tears of the Israelites, or the horseradish that we have to eat till tears come into our own eyes. And most essentially, I wonder about the matzah, the unleavened bread that we must eat that night and for a week instead of leavened bread. The script for the Seder comes from a special book called the Haggadah, which means the narration, the telling of the story. It aims to tell the story of the event. the Haggadah began its development in the Mishnah, that compilation of rabbinic discussions and the development of the Bible composed in 200 of the Common Era. And since then, there have been a number of editions of rituals and passages to be recited, all aimed at that instruction. You shall tell your child, as well, of course, as the adults. And one of the early editions was the recital of the 10 plagues visited upon the Egyptians, the events that persuaded Pharaoh to agree to Moses' request in the name of God, let my people go. At a key point in the Seder, the 10 plagues are recited by all who are gathered round the table. We recite just the titles: blood, frogs, lice, cattle disease, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, and death of the firstborn. And I will describe the choreography of the Seder later, but the 10 plagues are described in full and dramatic narrative in the book of Exodus. In fact, it takes 5 whole chapters from chapter 7 to chapter 11 to tell the story. The saga can be viewed through many lenses. The drama builds up until the final tragic act, with Pharaoh realizing that he hasn't been spared this time. His own firstborn son lying dead alongside the firstborn of every Egyptian, the noble or the serf. Only the Hebrews are spared because of the sign on their door, the blood of the lamb sacrificed in each household that afternoon. This caused, according to the Bible, the angel of death to pass over their dwellings, Passover becoming the name of the festival itself. The Hebrew word Pesach actually means, is the name of the actual lamb that is offered up. Well, before going on to the recital of the plagues at the Seder, let's look at the saga as it appears in the Bible and the problems it raises and the solutions given. First of all, is the saga a factual account? Did it ever happen? There's no record of it other than in the Bible. And there's no obvious parallel in other Near Eastern literature of the same period. However, each of the actual plagues can be described as possible and realistic. The River Nile does occasionally turn red. Explanations range from floods upriver that mix red earth into the water. Other scientists talk of microorganisms multiplying in the water, and we can see this happening to this day from time to time in different parts of the world, especially, it seems, with global warming. Locusts are still a plague that actually devastated East Africa earlier this very year. Foot and mouth disease attacked modern cattle a few years back. Do you remember it happening? And sandstorms blotted out the sun in Australia for a long time following the recent devastating fires. All the plagues can be seen as natural occurrences, except maybe the last one, death of the firstborn. But even here, commentators and scientists have found natural explanations for what might have happened. These scientists come up with theories that link one plague with the next, one causing the next one to occur. A few years back, I saw an in-depth television program where the scientists demonstrated how the Red Nile caused by flooding led to an unusually large number of frogs. And the massive number of frogs then died in the heat as the waters receded, and their corpses led to an infestation of flies that attacked the cattle and so on. And I note that Nahum Sana, one of the foremost modern biblical scholars, who usually takes a rationalistic approach, posits this sequential approach. All very plausible, except that it depends on the exact order of plagues as described in the book of Exodus. The TV scientists overlooked the fact that there are two other accounts of the plagues in Psalm 78 and Psalm 105. And here, the order and the number is different. The best that one can say is that there is nothing mythical or supernatural about the plagues. They could have happened. They all do happen. And what we have in the book of Exodus is maybe a recollection of an unusual coincidence of a number of natural disasters that led to political change. The phenomena of global warming and its effects on everyday life of individual nations. And now, this pandemic of COVID-19 makes this scenario all too real. What will our societies look like after this plague has been conquered? As I say, it's just a little bit frightening at the moment. However, let's look at the account of the plagues as a piece of literature, and it's superb dramatic literature that scholars have noted centuries ago is deliberately structured as a 3 times 3 plus 1 structure. There are 3 trios then. The first in each trio of tribes sees Moses confronting Pharaoh in the morning, in the opening at the River Nile. For instance, after the first plague, God says, and I quote, "Go to Pharaoh in the morning as he is coming out of the water. Station yourself by the edge of the Nile and say, 'Let my people go that they may worship me in the wilderness.'" And the second in that trio takes place in Pharaoh's palace, where Moses gives warning of what will happen if Pharaoh refuses to let the Hebrews go. And then the third plague in each trio happens without any warning. And Moses' demands get more extensive as the plagues progress, from a mere permission to leave to worship God in the desert, to leaving en masse, taking with them their possessions, their herds and their flocks. Although we can't prove the historical veracity of the plagues, we do know that in the Israelite tradition and psyche, they exist as firm events even in later Bible times. Their appearance in the book of Psalms shows how well known the story was of the plagues being a necessary instrument in changing Pharaoh's mind. And it took a number of plagues, even if in the Psalms they do not add up to 10. Although later, still early on, a problem raised by the plagues was discussed. A repeated aspect of the narrative with reference to the first 5, it says that Pharaoh hardened his heart and would not let the Hebrews go. But then for the rest of the plagues, it changes to the words, "And God hardened Pharaoh's heart." The Midrash, the rabbinic comment from the 12th century, asks the question, and I quote, "Does not this afford an opening to the heretics? For surely it questions the doctrine of free will and portrays God as deliberately making Pharaoh take a negative attitude in order to increase the dreadful effect on the plagues and the terror it would bring on all Egyptians, not just Pharaoh." If God is all powerful, why not produce just one plague to change Pharaoh's heart? And why not soften his heart, not harden it? This must have been a serious question debated at the occasional Seder throughout the generations. I can remember it going back to my own childhood, when the rebel in the family who was really sort of would rather be someone else, was challenging over all aspects of it and said, isn't this terrible? If God is all powerful, why not make it just happen? Soften Pharaoh's heart and make him leave. And indeed, from the 19th century onwards, certain Reform and liberal Jewish Haggadot have left out the plagues altogether, highlighting the theological problem that they raised. Of course, a simple answer is that the change from Pharaoh to God is all part of the literary style. And the usual sermonic answer is the thought that tyrants initially show little compassion or reason, but this behavior becomes habitual and they just increase their immoral choices, even to their own destruction. And we can think of so many examples of this throughout history. And it's natural to gloat a little over the defeat of an enemy who has been or is persecuting you. In the 1st and 2nd centuries, the Romans were now the enemy of the Jews. And in the traditional Haggadah, we get listed not just 10 plagues, for the ancient rabbis increased the number to 240. You'll have to look it up to work out how they did that. From the Middle Ages, the recitation of the plagues was recited with added gusto. Because, and I hope I don't offend anybody now, because Passover coincides with Easter. And it was the key time of year for medieval pogroms against Jews. Christians, having heard in church about the New Testament claim of the Jewish responsibility for the crucifixion of Jesus. The plagues stress the power of God to overcome persecution and persecutors. And the Jewish communities of the Middle Ages in Europe needed saving at that time, and sadly on so many occasions ever since. Having said that, the usual atmosphere when the plagues are recited is not one of seriousness or discussion. It tends to be one of hilarity, encouraged by the fact that as each plague is recited, it's traditional to dip your little finger in the wine cup and put a drop on the plate, a drop of wine on which the cup is standing. Often the finger misses and the drop of wine falls on the tablecloth. And look at many time-worn Haggadot, and the pages are spotted with wine stain. Of late, children's puppets and toys are popular in the forms of plagues, especially jumping frogs for some reason. I know that our own family say there has been enlivened with all of these puppets and these toys that, well, after all, the Seder is there to keep children's attention, and these do. Although it did strike me as rather ironic that most of these toys are made in China nowadays, but maybe it's a gift to them. We'll have to see. As I say, the command is to tell your children. And many of the other rituals, for instance, dipping the green herbs into salt water, are visual and olfactory aids for telling the story. This is one of the key features of the Seder, that the story is told in so many ways, through the food, through the songs, through the recitation, and through the discussion. Let me end not with jumping frogs, but with some serious thoughts. A number of Haggadot explain the custom of wine dipping, following the view of the Sephardi commentator Yitzhak Abravanel, living in Portugal and then Italy at the end of the 15th century. He said, and I quote, "A drop of wine is spilled from each cup to indicate that the joy of our redemption is not complete. Even though the plagues were deserved, our freedom was brought about through the suffering meted out on the Egyptians. As it says in Proverbs 24, when your enemy falls, do not exult." And this view was found centuries earlier in the Talmud. It is a comment on God saving the Israelites a second time at the Sea of Reeds, where, following the Egyptians drowning in the waters of the sea, and I quote, the Midrash says, the ministering angels wanted to chant their hymns of praise to the Holy One, blessed be He. But God said, the work of my hands are drowning in the sea. Would you chant hymns of praise? Let me end with a connection to you in Bratislava. The Katav Sofer, the son of the Khatam Sofer, commented on the plague of darkness, and I quote, when a man does not see the other or want to see them, there is darkness in the world. As I face Passover in the isolation of my home, just with my wife, yet by the magic of the internet, can connect with my wider family, and also address you in Bratislava, the Katav Sofer reminds us that even in our isolation, we must think of and remember those who do not have the internet and those who are suffering during this modern plague, especially those in maybe less developed countries. And we who are well should give thought to all who are suffering. May this plague end, as we say in the Haggadah right at the end, Bim Heira v'yameinu, soon and in our day. To that I will say, Amen. Thank you.